Good evening, everyone. Happy summer solstice to all our viewers, to our supporters, and to the medicine family around the world. This evening, I am delighted to introduce Adah Parris, who will be with us for the evening, talking about a number of very interesting things. Just to introduce myself to people that don't know me, my name's Remy. I'm one of the founding Medicine Council members. I'm also a strategic and executive coach for women. So my focus is on women's empowerment, female leadership. And so this month, Women's Voices is a particularly dear one to me. And I would like to give a bit of background to Adah, our fantastic guest, who is many things: an a futurist, a cultural strategist, a systems designer, an artist, a storyteller. I think it's fair to describe you as a polymath, Adah, an enthusiastic curator of people, patterns, and stories. And she unpacks some pretty big topics in doing so: identity, culture, economics, and ecosystems. And I just wanted to say, amongst her many notable accolades, in 2019, she was recognized as one of TED Talk's Global Emerging Innovators. And in 2018, she was recognised as one of the UK's top 100 Black and minority ethnic, so BAME, leaders in technology. And tonight she's going to be talking to us about her new framework, Cyborg Shamanism, exploring how ancient tech meets modern tech, and her creation of a new ism for a better future. So welcome, Adah.
Yay! Good evening, Remy. Good evening, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here on this wonderful, challenging, exciting day. Evening.
Yeah. Well, happy summer solstice. I get the challenges.
Yeah. Happy summer solstice to you as well.
Oh, thank you. And actually, I was just going to say, given the topics that we're going to explore today in terms of ancient wisdom and ancestry, and this cosmic solstice, I was just thinking, I wonder how our ancient selves would have addressed each other back in the day. What would we have learnt when we addressed each other? And I wanted to ask you, actually, what does Adah mean and where's it from?
Yeah. So, it's an interesting one. There's a conversation I've been having a lot recently about the way that we introduce ourselves, especially given everything, our sense of identity, especially given everything that's happening in the world, with Black Lives Matter and labels and all of this stuff. And, our names, especially as people of color or people of heritage or culture, as I've forgotten his name, but there's a great talk about it. We introduce ourselves by our names because they have heritage. So I was born in London in the UK. My father is Nigerian Igbo. My mother is Guyanese. Right. And Adah is, so being Igbo, Adah is a name usually or a title given to all firstborn daughters. And it means God's gift. And so, regardless if you're the eldest daughter, the eldest child, the first daughter is always the Adah, and you're seen as the wise woman, the oracle. And so you have that level of status and responsibility as well, being the eldest daughter. And what does your name mean?
I'll tell you, but it's fascinating actually that we also follow the path of our names, because that wise woman, the oracle, the futurist part of you, it's quite, isn't that interesting?
So just to say, my other Igbo name, actually, as you're bringing it up, my other Igbo name is Ijoma, which means journey. And I suppose that also plays out because of the way that I see life as a continuous experiment.
Yeah. So my name's Remy, but my full name is also Nigerian, but it's Yoruba, and it's Oluwaremi Lekun, and it means God consoles your tears, so grief. Grief. And then my second name, I'm half Assamese, so that's northeast India for those people that don't know where that is Orana, so daughter of the sun. So essentially, it's
this is your time.
Yeah. Which and talking of light, it's worth spending a moment as we have all enjoyed and rejoiced in the sun's rays in the longest day of the year, just to sort of check in, because this solstice is an epic one. I've been reading a little bit about the different types of ancient nature worship done all over the world at this time. So the solstice, most people will know, is commonly celebrated in the Northern Hemisphere. But as far as ancient China, the summer solstice was a ceremony to celebrate the earth, femininity and yin forces. So it feels really fitting to be running our Women's Voices series at this time, and also to welcome you, Adah, with all of the rich topics that you cover. And I just wanted to add that this solstice is particularly epic because it wasn't just the solstice, it's also the solar eclipse, the annular eclipse, which meant you could see the ring of fire on the solstice with a new moon at 0 degrees in Cancer. And I was just reading that it makes it a really rare seed moment. It's a major turning point in human history. So I just wanted to ask you, how was yours? Because I know we've both been up since wee hours.
It's been tough. Not gonna lie, it's been tough. I think, given everything that's happening with the pandemic, and then Black Lives Matter and everything, that I really feel into, what's been happening around us, and I'm quite sensitive to a lot of that. And so I ended up yesterday. My friend normally does a midsummer in Sweden, but of course we can't travel, so she did an online version last night, which was beautiful. And then today I spent most of today in bed because I just felt that I needed to be still, and I could feel this energy kind of bubbling up. It's gone from my stomach to my chest, and I feel that I'm probably going to cry at some point and just release. But it's that, that sense of there's something building up and you just need to let it out. So it's been quite difficult. And I think that given everything else that's happening around us in the world at the moment, I'm probably not the only one that's feeling that.
No, I mean, I'm with you. I actually texted one of our other medicine council members, George, and I said to him, amazing, epic solstice. But I burst into tears, particularly because we were watching some of the footage just as you could see the full fire circle, and it really triggered something. And I also felt the grief and just the enormity of everything that's going on.
It's a collective trauma, isn't it?
Yeah.
And the fire circle is also a reminder. It's a very big visual reminder that everything is connected.
Yes, indeed. And actually, indeed, everything is connected. And that Cancer is the archetype of the mother. So she's the cosmic womb, the feminine energy in all of us, regardless of our genders. And I was reading somewhere that she rules these emotions. So therefore, it's this time where there's this unearthing of these deep wounds and these deep traumas, which we're witnessing globally. So,
especially for this occasion, I put on my goddess cape. It's a wearable art that my friend made for me, but it's this, I just felt that I needed to have a little something. I'm very much about colors, and so this is kind of grounding me and earthing me at the moment as well.
Wonderful. Welcome, goddess Adah. I'm feeling slightly underdressed now.
That's a great look.
So I'm conscious that we're already looking at astrology, ancient, to make sense of this solstice moment and this point in history. And it feels like a perfect moment for you to tell us a bit more about Cyborg Shamanism, this meeting of old and new, and just how it was born. Born. That would be share that with us.
Thank you. So as your introduction, I've always worn many hats. I wanted to be an astronaut when I was young because I fell in love with Mr. Spock and wanted to go to space. So I've had that big, desire, and I've always been very curious about things that are bigger than me, that are out there, the so-called unexplained. I've been an artist. I was always into art. I'm very spiritual. My mother, you would call me, a social justice warrior child, because the idea of difference, of othering and injustice is what used to make me cry. But also I've been into tech and all these different things. And so I've had many different careers, and for a while, from the outside, it looked like they weren't connected, because I would work in education and advertising and in tech and, all these different things. But actually, I now realize that what I was doing was research. And so I had got to a point where I'd just come back from Burning Man. I think my first trip or second trip to Burning Man. So I'd been looking at a lot of stuff around identity. I was working as a futurist. And what that means is, rather than trying to predict the future of technologies, what I do is I take a philosophical and anthropological look at what technology is. And to me, technology is a tool. And I try to understand it in terms of its impact on our sense of identity, our culture, our economics, and our ecosystems. And at the time, I was organizing an event on transhumanism, and had been speaking to a guy who's now become a friend, who's a cyborg, and he has a piece of hardware technology implanted into his chest.
Wow.
So I said to him, well, why have you got this? So what the tech does is, it's a little box, a little thing that's, a bit like a piercing, the dermal piercing that you would have, and it's implanted into his chest. And when it detects magnetic north, it vibrates. And so essentially it turns him into a compass. So he can navigate by finding where north is. So I said to him, well, why put the tech into you? Why do you do that? And he said, well, I feel that this is future human, and it's helping me to connect with myself. It's helping me to connect with my environment, which is the earth. And it's helping me to connect with others, because there is a community of people who have this. And that whole connecting with the earth, is a big part of all of this. And I said to him, so what you're saying sounds really familiar. When people talk about their shamanic journeys, they talk about using a medicine or a technology, a tool, to connect with themselves, their environment, and with each other. And so I realized that actually, at that time, I thought that they were polar opposite ends. So you had the cyborgs on one hand and the shaman on the other, trying to achieve this same sense of understanding, but their tools or their technology was different. And what I realized is that if the tools are different, if the behaviors are the same and the tools are different, then maybe there's no hierarchy. One technology or tool is not better than the other. There's no validity. It doesn't have power over the other, but they are equal. And so maybe what we could do is actually bring those different worlds together to solve problems. And that's how I started understanding cyborg shamanism. And then the more I started to explore that, realized that spirituality and quantum physics and all these different worlds, the behavior is exactly the same. There's a separation between it and us. And my worry was that we were getting to a place where that gap between it and us was getting bigger. But actually now what I've done is brought those things together.
Amazing. So the pattern is the same, actually.
Yeah.
The means of achieving that connectivity.
That sense of enlightenment, whether, we're all looking for the way that we use technology. A lot of it is, and when I say technology, I'm not talking about just a mobile phone or digital or algorithmic technology. I'm talking about tools for enlightenment or guidance. So the way that I describe it is that we have been using these tools to, as though we're looking for a new religion. We're looking for something bigger than ourselves to help us understand ourselves, our environment, and each other. And it just happened that I recognized the pattern when I was having that conversation. But that was 5 years ago, nearly 6 years ago, in fact. And I'd been mind mapping that and speaking to people in different worlds, so neuroscientists and quantum physicists and gamers and shaman and all sorts of people. And they helped to shape the idea and the patterns. And, across all those worlds, they've all recognized that the pattern is the same. And what it's actually done so far is been able to help them understand the other worlds as well.
Right. Which is another theme that you talk of a lot in your work, the sort of the finding the other, and enabling those stories to be heard. So perhaps you can talk a bit about that. And I'd love that to maybe segue, if we can, into how this relates to women. And because I'm reading some of your work, where you said, I've always adopted feminism and been a feminist, and yet when I look at my privilege and my lived experience of womanhood, that's not necessarily a complete enough statement. So yeah, I'll leave you with
So initially, cyborg shamanism was just an idea. I saw the patterns and I didn't quite know what to make of it. And actually, I was just, the more I started to speak about it, the more I was introduced to other people who recognized it and said, oh, you should speak to this person or that person. And it became a hypothesis for change, or, an idea that I wanted to explore and understand how could I turn it into something. Where it's got to now is that it's become a community. And what I do is I'm looking at what would be the impact on innovation or our ability to solve problems if we included, or if we actively sought out other ways of knowing, other ways of understanding. So bringing in other voices, other technologies, other wisdom. And that, that became what I was looking at. So whether do I create events online or these experiences online, or do I create them offline? And I suppose a bigger part of cyborg shamanism is also about diversity and inclusion. Bringing those other voices to the forefront. And I suppose interestingly, actually, you know what? A lot of this actually started at Wasinga, if I'm honest. If I think about it now, if I'm not honest, I'm always honest, but if I think about it now, because I had never really seen, I used to be quite a quiet person, quite shy, and not really sharing my voice or opinions. And I think I'd been a bit of an
very hard to believe, Adah.
Oh God, yeah, no, very much so. And I was a bit of an armchair feminist and an armchair activist. So, I would change my Facebook profile or I'd shout at the TV, but never really found my voice. And it took a while for me to get to that place of really just enough was enough. And I said I needed to start finding my voice. And Valeria, yes. So Valeria, actually years ago, hi Valeria, got in touch with me and said to me, I'd love you to write a book on feminism. And I had an existential crisis because I had this real moment of going, but I don't look like the feminists that are on TV or in the media. And, their version of, or the media's portrayal of what feminism is not me. And I think that it's been a very much a Western construct of an idea of what it should be. And at the moment I'm doing an evening course on decolonizing anthropology, which is fascinating. And this week's reading was about decolonizing feminism. Wow. And the idea that there are these different versions of what feminism is, because in Africa, and my grandmother, my father's mother would never have had, the idea of being a feminist as it's defined. But there was a certain, sense of womanhood and being, strong and all of these things. And so I was in this space of being torn and understanding what it actually means. And I just decided that actually I needed to go and do some research to understand myself and understand what feminism means to me and what sisterhood means and, intersectionality and all of these things. And so I started mind mapping. And that was the first mind map that led to the 4 freedoms. So identity, culture, economics, and ecosystems, which then led to cyborg shamanism.
Right.
So it actually started the first conversation. I like to trace things back to their origins and acknowledge where things came from.
Right.
And that is the idea of the ancient wisdom and new thinking, because going to where we were talking about the ring of fire, that everything is connected, and we sometimes forget or choose to ignore, or ego gets in the way and we just dismiss the origins of where things come from. But nothing just happened just like that, and it doesn't happen in isolation. And so that was my journey to bringing that and understanding that now is a time of the rise of female voices and female energy, and cyborg shamanism can be a framework that can help some of that. That's the idea.
Yeah, great. And I mean, it totally chimes with my work. You know, I'm really very focused on female energy, but also this sort of notion of female wisdom and female intelligence.
Yeah.
You know, just that meta intelligence that we need to tap into more than ever now. Not to make the masculine wrong, but just to make sure that the feminine is rising in the way that it needs to.
But I'm also very mindful of of binaries, of masculine and feminine as binaries, because that is to me completely wrong as well.
Yeah.
But when I talk about feminine and masculine energies, and maybe the language is still clumsy, but I'm talking about the energies rather than the anatomy of anything, because there were
that which transcends gender.
Yeah, yes, and the fact that when we look at ancient cultures and indigenous cultures as well, the idea of the idea of these binary sexes, genders, was mostly a Western construct anyhow. There wasn't this identity. They had I can't remember which First Nation tribe, but the First Nation tribe had third genders, and there was this fluidity of identity, which I think is also really important to acknowledge, because we're moving back into a space where there is a lot more talk and understanding of the fluidity of identity and the power that can bring, because nothing is static.
Yeah, nothing is static indeed. And just to ask a little more about how cyborg shamanism has helped you evolve your thinking from feminism. What are the aspects of it that have sort of opened up your thinking now, as you're developing this framework, or this framework is evolving?
So the whole cyborg shaman journey has is actually, it maps my own life journey. Right. It maps my own life journey. So, when we talk about storytelling, we tend, and I say we, and I mean the societal, the governing societal norms at the moment, we tend to use the hero's journey. There is a hero who goes on a quest. There is, the guru, the savior, the whatever, the mentor, who is the one who gives that person the key to unlocking everything else. But what I realized is my own journey was about exploration in these different worlds of these different types of technology, or these different worlds. So immerse myself in, algorithmic stuff, immerse myself in the shamanic world, immerse myself in spirituality. And what's happened is that I'm a bit of a translator. I'm able to speak those different languages and synthesize those ideas to bring them together. So it means that before the lockdown, I do a lot of public speaking, and the last talk I did was in Dubai in February at a big tech conference, and they put me on the innovation and money stage, and I'm in Dubai talking about cyborg shamanism at a tech conference. But it's about the language that I use. So rather than just talking about cyborgs and shaman, I talked about ancient wisdom, and the fact that ancient wisdom can bring, that we all live in cultures that have history and legacy and all sorts of stuff, and we can learn a lot from those. And the way that has been able to speak those different languages, but also to meet people in those different worlds, has broadened my own understanding of myself, my own levels of inquiry. So when I recognize a new pattern, I would go to my friend who is a quantum physicist and say, this is what I've seen. Does that replicate anything in quantum physics? And then she will explain that to me through quantum physics. And it just means that I can then when I'm out and about and I see another pattern, I may be able to recognize that as a pattern in quantum physics. And it just means that everything, it's probably why it takes me so long to read a book now as well. I mean, it used to take, because I used to go into a book, read a book and then look at, take my time to digest it. But because I'm now reading it, and I think what's happened is that I've become more multi-sensory, and I see things from a more of a multi-dimensional perspective, you know, so that it's not just it's not just a pen, or it's not just, you know, a tree. It is a tree because we have a relationship with it, and the tree would not exist without us.
And by the same token, it's not just a feminist woman, you know, it's a woman with a lived experience of X,
Yeah,
and knowledge of Y, and upbringing of, and all of those different aspects of ourselves that we yeah, we sometimes, we are either pressured to not integrate, or we just fail to integrate because we're busy
well,
responding.
for International Women's Day this year, I wrote a thought piece, which was the Cyborg Shaman Manifesto for Women. It was part of I was commissioned to write it, and actually you can find it on Medium. It is called Cyborg Shamanism and Manifesto for Women. And what I talk about is the fact that, you know, the idea of cyborg shamanism is also at the heart of it is diversity and inclusion, and how can we come together to solve problems. And I talk about the fact that we as women have been pitted against each other, and you know that we, you know, that the idea of feminism has been the idea of much of feminism has been created, and it has taken bits and pieces that it likes from different worlds and bunched it together and left everything else, and actually disregarded those people who come from those other worlds, or those people who are othered. And, you know, I talk about in the manifesto, I talk about this idea of selective goddess enlightenment, because there's only certain goddesses that are referred to. And, you know, when you think about when you think about the world, you know, I don't hear anybody, you know, very few in those worlds talking about the Orisha. And I'm not saying, you know, I'm also mindful of people colonizing those ideas and taking them on as their own. But it's the acknowledgement that where are the Persian, or the Ethiopian, or the Yoruba, or the Hausa, or where are the other goddesses? And we as women were the birth of, responsible for the birth of nations and ideas and cultures and language and technology. But in order to do that, we had to come together. And so the manifesto is more a rallying cry. It's not, saying feminism is wrong. What it is, it's a rallying cry to get us to think, to look at ourselves first and ask, the way that I end it is, what kind of ancestor do we want to be? What kind of ancestor do I want to be? And what kind of ancestor do we want to be? Because we can't do those things on our own. So we need to come together. And it's events like, Medicine Festival and Musinga and various events that bring people together to start to look at who we are and go into those shadows and recognize that it's going to be tough, like what we're experiencing now. It's going to be tough, but that is part of the work. That is part of the work. And we shouldn't use a tool or a technology as the work. And that's the point. Those tools, those plant medicines, that's not the work. That's opening up. To me, that's turning on the floodgate. That's opening us up to be able to do the work. And so that's my approach to it, that we can use them. And, but the medicine is really inside of us.
Oh my goodness. I mean, everything that you're saying, yes, to us. Because, firstly, I just love this question. What kind of ancestor do I want to be? I mean, it's said like a true futurist, but, it's such a great question. Actually, it's, it's something that we probably rarely ask ourselves, and yet we're handing over a world that's in such chaos to the next generation. So it's just a great question, and it's got real overlap and synergy with what we're aiming to do at Medicine Festival, which is exploring and honouring these indigenous wisdoms from all over. I love the fact that you mentioned the Orishas. I'm very connected to Oshun because she's a water goddess, so I feel that's a very deep connection. And so, but exploring these indigenous wisdoms, ancient technologies, and in doing so, we're trying to see how that sort of frames our central question, which is, how do we become the medicine for people and planet at a time of global pandemic and crises? You know, I find myself asking all sorts of questions about, you know, how we emerge from this. So, you know, what you speak to, and cyborg shamanism being a way for us to access a deeper inquiry using technology as a tool in, you know, and I mean old and new tech, is really, really resonant and brilliant.
There's, you know, sometimes we get stuck in doing the inner work just for ourselves, when actually that's the first step.
Yep, absolutely.
You know, we have to, in order to change things, we also have to come together with others, and sometimes that means that we have to do that when we're not quite sure that we've actually finished our work. Because, you know, do we ever, I suppose the question is, do we ever actually finish our own inner work? And if we are waiting to finish our inner work before we take the next step, then we'll never get there.
Yeah.
So I think it's a process, it's a balancing act of, you know, doing the inner work till we get to a particular point where we can start to question, you know, explore outside ourselves and actually come together. So with cyborg shamanism, what I've done is exploring those patterns that I've explained, you know, and those worlds that I've mentioned. I actually then started to recognize bigger patterns of transformation. So, you know, a friend refers to it as the anatomy of transformation. And there are now, what I've recognized and what seems to be working is that there are 5 phases to this transformation. So going back to the story, you know, the storytelling framework, there's 5 phases. And those 5 phases also reflect and represent the 5 elements: ether, air, fire, water, and earth. So phase 1 is about questioning the isms or the existing structures and looking at, you know, where are we now? You know, what are the governing isms and the ideas, the structures that are there, and how do they match our current existing values? Phase 2, which is about what's our hypothesis for change? What can we learn? It's the relational learning. How do we create a new hypothesis for change? We can't do that on our own, so we have to start to come together. Phase 3 is about learning from each other and what are the tools and the technologies and the insights and the ancient wisdom and all of this that are normally maybe outside of our echo chambers, our usual bubbles, that may be able to help us. So that's where you start to recognize patterns.
Right.
And so you start to recognize patterns. And then phase 4 is the kind of the question around why now? Why now? Why me? And, you know, so you really get into that. And then phase 5 is about grounding it down and saying, okay, so now that we've got to this point, how do we make this stick? How do we ground this and how do we scale this? And so you go through the 5 phases, and then what you do is you actually go back to phase 1 to check, because the world is constantly changing. It's constantly changing, and so it should be fluid. It should be a cyclical process that, you know, you constantly check in. You don't get to the point where you say, okay, we're done now, that's it. I can see, sorry, Zach has just shared a question. When you talk about ancient wisdom, what do you mean? What I'm talking about is knowledge, is insights, is, you know, to me, shamanism is about actively seeking other ways of knowing. And I mean that is quite in some ways it's quite a reductionist view, but it's just the idea of bringing, you know, the fact that we are actively going out to seek another way of understanding. And it could be astrology, astronomy, it could be plant medicines, it could be, you know, there are so many different ways of knowing that, you know, you have the Kogi who go into caves, and you have sound meditation, and you have, you know, Bitwi, and you have all the different, you know, you have people who voodoo and all different ways of understanding and knowledge and wisdom that are out there. And I think that, you know, we've spoken about this before, that, you know, as humans, our ego gets in the way a lot, and we believe that we are the foundations of knowledge and everything, but actually there are other ways of understanding that, you know, our ancestors and people who came before us knew and understood. I mean, I'm currently reading a couple of books. One is on quantum societies, so the idea of quantum physics and societies. I'm also reading a book about ether, which is your belief system.
Yeah.
And what I'm seeing is there's a parallel in both books. Both books are talking about the same thing. This idea of something bigger than themselves, and animism, and the fact that everything, you know, has this sense of being, of consciousness. So that, yeah.
It's fascinating that so many of these ancient cosmologies have this continuous golden thread.
Yeah.
But exactly as you were talking to the point around, we become, you know, just the human experience caught up in our own understanding of knowledge rather than actually this ongoing inquiry, which is why I really like what you're doing with Cyborg Shamanism, because it feels like there's a framework with which we can place our inquiry and iterate and iterate and iterate, which hopefully means we're keeping it fresh and we're keeping it current. There's so many things you said that I want to ask you about. One of which was within just within your framework, within your 5 pillars. Where do you think Medicine Festival sits?
So I think that Medicine Festival is probably around phase 2 and 3. So phase 2 is creating a hypothesis for change, and phase 3 is about actively going out and seeking other ways of knowing and bringing those different ways of knowing together so that you can solve problems, and not creating, not saying there's a hierarchy and, you know, this medicine is better than that medicine and this because it comes from here, and none of that. It's about acknowledging that there are other ways out there, there are other systems that may have some of other medicines, other technologies, whatever language you want to use, that have that could be used as, I don't like the word used because it makes it, but that could be harnessed, and we couldn't understand how to engage with them in a different way, in a respectful way, in a non-colonial way. That means that we all gain from that. And rather than the few, this is about, you know, the broader church of people, of humanity and the planet.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's something that's really central to what we're trying to hold. In fact, when we created the structure, we looked at lots of different structures, and we decided to become a community interest company. So completely profit, so that in time, if the event starts to make money, it doesn't, but if it starts to make money in the future, those funds would go back to indigenous charities and groups. And all of our speakers that come on, we always ask listeners to donate to the said charity. In fact, I should have mentioned actually that Adah did say she would like any donations being made by our listeners and viewers to go to Black Lives Matter. And Zach, I'm sure, will put the link up to that at the beginning and at the end. So Zach, when you're ready, if you could do that, that would be brilliant. But yeah, it is exactly that. It's that sort of reciprocity. Ben, one of our council members, key founder, often talks about this principle of Aini, to be in sacred reciprocal balance with the earth, so that, you know, you're giving and receiving, which again is, you know, something that, you know, the earth gives us everything, literally everything. You know, I was saying to my girl the other day, you know, from the clothes that you wear to the shoes that you are on your feet to the food that you eat, you know, and yet how many times do we say thank you? So
well, I mean, it's a bit like, you know, I feel that as devastating as this pandemic is, you know, it's also, it feels a bit like the earth has just put us on the naughty step.
Yeah.
You know, we're just time out. I mean, I wrote a piece about called The Coronavirus and Being Human. And it talks about, through the lens of Cyborg Shamanism, it talks about the patterns that I've seen in this pandemic and the lessons that we can learn. And, you know, so the first is that we as humans create borders and boundaries. You know, we colonize or we divide and conquer, and we create these levels of hierarchy. The coronavirus does not care. Yeah. It does not recognize, it does not care about the borders and the boundaries that we as humans have created. Mm-hmm. And actually what we see is that, you know, especially in the earlier days, the way when people were trying to find solutions, all those borders and boundaries started falling away, and people going, here's access to my data, here's access to my insights. We just need to come together and try and solve problems. So I think we can act like the virus in that sense and forget, you know, break down those dividing borders and boundaries, because that's how we're going to try and start addressing problems that are for the good of all, not about profit. The profit, you know, market share, profit, that's why those borders maintain. Mm. The second one is that, you know, when this first hit, you know, people were freaking out. We were afraid. It was fear. And, it, you know, one of my mentors describes it that we were going through a global earthquake. And everything was going to shit and flying all over the place. And people, you know, that whole kind of survival mode. That's why you saw people running to buy toilet rolls and what have you. I mean, how many toilet rolls do you need? But that's why, you know, people are doing it. Mm. But actually, what we also then started to see is the resurgence of the hyperlocal community that was based on empathy and compassion. Yeah. It wasn't based on how much money you've got or your gender or sexual orientation or anything like that. It is still based on, it has been and is still based on, what are your most basic needs? Yeah. I see you as a human. I recognize the human in you. How can I help support you get your most basic needs met, your most human needs met?
It's a cool thing, actually, just to come into your point on hyper-localization. I remember going to one of our local shops in the village, and the shopkeeper was explaining that he had run out of seeds and vegetable seeds and flower seeds, and actually, you know, people were returning to the earth to plant their veg gardens and doing it for their elderly neighbours that couldn't do it. And you know, something so heartwarming about that this crisis, for all the challenges and for all the illness and for all the stress that it's brought to many, many people who we feel deeply compassionately towards, that this blessing, this hyper-localization, as you talk about, as we feel suddenly connected to these little hubs in our community. I think is it World Localization Day today? There's another big thing going on today. But anyway, sorry to interrupt.
But it's also, to your point, it's also recognizing that the planet is not here to serve us. The planet was here before us. Mm. You know, and it will, you know, if the way that we were going on, it could well be here after us if we didn't buck up our ideas. So, you know, it's that recognizing that, you know, that the hyper-local community and recognizing us as humans and those most basic needs is what was happening. And the third one was that regardless of who we were forced to stop. We were forced to stop. And some people were okay with that. Others not so much, because we become a nation. We've become, you know, a species, or Western especially, a species of distracting ourselves with, you know, all sorts of stuff and the most plausible excuses for why we can't do things. But actually, it's just a means of distraction. And actually, this has forced us to stop and really look at ourselves in the mirror, you know, eye gazing with ourselves and saying, okay, so what does it mean to be human? What is important to me? Who is important to me? What are the things that I value? So what's important to me is I need to feed myself and feed those around me. And so we go back to planting and, you know, toiling the land and, you know, all of those things. Yeah. And that is how, you know, those were the things that I saw, and those are the lens. That is through the Cyborg Shamanism lens.
Yeah. And I thank you. I love what you, I was listening to one of your interviews. I can't remember which one now. And I read quite a fair amount of your writing. And you were shielding during this pandemic, which is the most limited type of quarantine, I suppose the strictest type of quarantine. Yeah. And I just loved the way you talked about it as a sort of a period or a time for metamorphosis. I just wondered whether you could share a little bit more about what you went through during this pandemic. Because it's, you know, I personally didn't have to shield, and so it's another very different lived experience.
So over 20 years ago, I had a car accident and my spleen burst, and all sorts of complications. And I have lived a very careful life because that spleen, it helps you fight infection and all sorts of stuff. And when the pandemic, when it came in to the UK, I was always very careful. But my GP phoned me and said, no, you need to shield. You need to stay at home. You cannot go outside of your front door. You're going to have to get people. We will get you onto the NHS, the government list, and you'll get all sorts of support. And I had a couple of immediate reactions. So one, I became the petulant child. I was like, you've taken away my I don't know who this you is, but there was this sense of, well, this is not fair. My freedoms have been taken away. I should be able to go out. But at the same time, I know that it's for my health. But you do have that sense of injustice of going, well, how? That's not fair. Yeah. But I present as an extrovert, but I'm definitely more introvert, and that's about where I get my energy from. I can be around people, but I actually get my energy from being still. So I knew that I would be okay being, relatively okay being on my own. But then I started, as it started, I started to settle into it. I thought about what are the things that I'm really going to miss. So nature, being in nature. So I've turned my flat into a indoor garden, and actually I've been doing so well that my plants are starting to take over. And I know that what are my self-care methods, and sometimes it may be different types of meditation or yoga or cooking or what have you. But I decided that rather than seeing this as a quarantine, I'm going to look at this as a period of metamorphosis. So a bit like the Cogni tribe, going into a cave to retreat, to be still, like a caterpillar going into a cocoon. I decided that that's how I'm going to approach this, that it's going to be a period of stillness. So at the beginning, I lost, I had paid speaking gigs booked right up until August. And it's the first year that I'd started with all of this stuff. And I was like, yes, finally, I have got to that place. It's amazing. And then because my gigs were outside of the UK, they all went at the very beginning. And rather than deciding that I'm going to put everything online, I just went, okay, so I'm going to sit in this stillness because I need to really reconnect with myself, but also I need to see, the pattern recognizer of me. I need to see what is happening outside, and I need to, people watch and see what's needed, which was tough, but it's been a beautiful process. And sometimes, when it's tough, I would say it's a bit like the caterpillar in the cocoon is decomposing to prepare itself to come out as something new, and that has been my journey. But now, the government have said that you can start to go out, and there's this whole back and forth about should you, shouldn't you. I'm just being very careful. So I've bought myself a bike. And yesterday Friday I went out with my best friend just for lunch on the river. But yesterday I went to the park for the first time on the bike with a very special person. Sorry?
First time in 3 months.
Yeah. And I went with a very special person and went on the bikes, and we had a picnic, and we lay on the grass and cuddled, and I watched the clouds. And that was just so precious, especially given, I can see the clouds. I've got great windows. I can see the clouds, but there's something different about being outside, the sun in your skin, feeling the earth beneath you and the grass beneath your skin, and feeling the wind on you, and having skin contact as well. So it was a beautiful multisensory re-immersion, back into the world. But I'm going to be sensible about it and, take my time. But it makes you, those things makes you really appreciate life and experiences and flavors and people and all of those things. And I think that, you know, it's been, whilst the pandemic has been tough, you know, and, you know, the loss of life is just, you know, no words can even begin to express what that can feel like and what that means. But it's also been a time of opportunity for all of us to recognize that we are problem solvers. This, like, you know, the world's, my tech world, you know, people talk about innovation and I'm the head of innovation and all of that. We're all innovators because we're all problem solvers. And this time, this period has shown us that we can think strategically and creatively to solve problems. Yeah. And I hope that once we start to continue to ease out of this, that we don't forget that. And we don't go back to, you know, the ways that we had before. People talk about this being the new normal. And you know,
was the old one any good though? I mean,
well, exactly. Well, you know, what we believed was normal, what many of us were questioning that already, but what people believed as normal, we've now, with hindsight, look back and go, that was a load of crap. You know, the economic systems, you know, the financial systems around the world that's supposed to be supporting us, you kind of go, actually, that's only really made for the 1% of the 1% because everybody else is struggling.
Yeah.
Everybody else is struggling. And what are you trying to do? Print more money? How does that help?
Yeah.
So it's given us this opportunity, you know, to really look at that. And I think that this is why, you know, we're also seeing the massive global response to Black Lives Matter, because the coronavirus came in and created this gap, this void, you know, this space, this liminal space, because we spent so much time previously focusing on the past or trying to predict the future that we weren't in the present. And we've had to be in the present. We had no choice but to be in the present, because nobody, not even the best futurists that, you know, trying to get us onto Mars, can tell you what the future is going to be like right now. And so we've had to live here in this present with this void, with this gap. And then, of course, well, I say of course, but, you know, Black Lives Matter, because none of you and I know as women of color that none of this racism or anything is new. But you know, Black Lives Matter, the latest racist atrocities came into that gap where people have already been questioning who I am, what does it mean to be human, what do I value, all of those things. And people have just gone, oh my God, you know, this, I realize what am I, what's my role and responsibility within that. And, you know, so the timing, I'm a big believer in timing, you know, the alignment of all of these things. I've got a Jewish friend who I speak to regularly, was talking about the Jewish calendar synchronizes with what's happening now as well. There's many calendars around the world that are synchronizing with these times. And, you know, as somebody who looks at patterns, I can't help but look at those and say, well, maybe this was supposed to happen at this time.
Yeah.
And I know that I want to be able to look back at this time and know what I did as a trying to change
an ancestor. You might be interested to know actually that on Wednesday we launch our Medicinema series and we're showing the film Luna, which is about the Kogi.
Yeah, I love that film.
Interview of a Kogi Mamo Senchina with Una Chaplin, the Avatar actress, and another medicine carrier, Antar. And so, just worth letting you know. I want to come on to Black Lives Matter because it's, I mean, gosh, hopefully we can run for a few extra minutes. But before we move into that, I just wanted to say two things. One was, I really appreciate you sharing your experience during COVID-19, because as I said, it's a different experience. And also just your ability to have, despite the challenges, turned it into an opportunity for growth and reflection, because I absolutely agree. I think we're so distracted as a human race. And actually, when you're forced to spend time with yourself, it can be pretty uncomfortable. And also you know, what you highlight, which sometimes we need a bit of a kick up the bum to remember, is this gratitude that actually we are so grateful for the touch of skin, for the for the warm embrace. You know, I really missed some of my closest friends. You know, it was a really big deal. And actually, you know, often I might just get my head back down to work, you know, so just being able to engage with those felt senses so much more, I think has been a real gift of this time now too.
I mean, you know, there's so many things. So I get my groceries from Oddbox. And, you know, once a week I get the delivery, and I don't look at it. They always tell you can go and look at what's going to be in the box, and I never do that. And I just decide that when the box turns up, I'm going to work out what I'm going to cook. You know, my trash, you know, I have less rubbish that I'm throwing away. Because I've had to think strategically about, I can't go to the corner shop like I used to. I can't pop down the road and go, oh, wait, I need to buy another onion, or I need to buy whatever, you know, and those lessons, I hope, stick with us, that we can be creative. We just need to care. We need to give a damn a bit more.
Yeah. You're absolutely right. And actually what you said, which felt really empowering when you said it, the energy of actually we are all problem solvers. And so, you know, it doesn't always have to be the biggest problem. Sometimes it's those baby steps of being able to, it's a small victory, and you suddenly think, okay, great, I've made something out of something I wouldn't have even dreamt of putting together. And it is, you know, it's that relearning of those small things. Sometimes we want, you know, it's the sort of the big bang versus just,
you know, that as a coach. You know, as a coach, that, you know, when a coach, you know, I'm a coach as well, that when we're with a coaching client and they want to make a change, you know, but sometimes people come in and go, right, I want to make this change. It's going to be this big thing. And you go, that's not how it works. That's not how it works. You've got to learn to walk first. And it's going to be a small incremental step that is going to make the change.
Yeah. And yeah, indeed. And as we start to think about emergence, or you know, the emerging into the next phase, I mean, I sort of feel like we've all been shot out of the cannon of this intense quarantine. I mean, I live in the countryside, so I have to say, for me, it's totally been a different experience to a city experience from everything that I hear and read. But nonetheless, the energy of being shot out of this sort of cannon into this moment of protest and civil unrest and a global response to Black Lives Matters, and pent-up fury and grief and rage because of this sustained trauma and the shakedown that's happening, which is necessary. I know it's a huge topic, but I mean, I just love your reflections on this pattern now. And so I guess the question I would ask, just because it's such a big, is how can we, once you talked a little bit about what you see, how can we start to have conversations that truly matter? How can we start to facilitate conversations that truly matter in this arena? And I'm just checking the time.
I think the way to start having conversations that truly matter is to go back to that point about empathy. You know, that, you know, the systems, so if we're talking, you know, the systems and structures have screwed all of us. You know, there's no winners really. You know, because we're all suffering from different types of trauma. You know, as people of colour, ours is very much more pronounced and obvious, you know, to us, you know, but on the other side, people have been, you know, been led to believe that systems and structures are supporting them, or, you know, are made for them. And so a sense of entitlement comes with that belief. And to recognize that is also a problem. That's not a good thing. To recognize that is also a problem is the first step. Is a one of several first steps, because I don't think there is one first step. I don't think that you know, there's never any panacea for anything. And if you think that, then I don't know. I don't believe that there is a panacea for everything. I think that we have to really look at ourselves and recognize the human in each other, and the fact that we're all going through different types of trauma. But I mean, with everything that's happening at the moment, especially with the Black Lives Matter and stuff, I've had to put up bigger boundaries for myself, you know, to say that I can hold space here or for this group of people and not for this other group of people or not for that, because, you know, we can't do it for everybody, and people have to go and educate themselves and learn from themselves. And asking people of color to repeat their to share their experiences is also asking people to repeat their trauma. And, you know, and that in itself is a form of, can be a form of oppression. And so this is why I say that there needs to be empathy, because posting pictures and asking people to repeat things can keep the situation where it is. But we need to just pull back from that and look at, how do I see the empathy in, how do I recognize the other human, and where am I going to stand in that, and what am I going to do?
Yeah, I mean, I agree, there is no one answer, and I think empathy's, I mean, always critical, but particularly so now as we understand. I know you refer to the sort of the story of the other, or people that feel that they've been othered. Something that I'm noticing a lot, and that, you know, gosh, we could do a whole session on this, and maybe we will. Something I'm noticing a lot, which I'm definitely speaking to, and I think we all need to find where our voice, even as a Black woman, a woman of colour, where my voice sits within this broader narrative, and that's personal and not clear for each and every one of us, all the same, right? But what I'm noticing, and one of the things I really sort of want to name, is I feel there's so much fear mongering, and there's so much fear that white friends of mine have said, I'm really frightened to even approach this. I don't know quite how to raise it. I feel I might offend, and I feel like I want to encourage people to come from that heart-based place and say, that's amazing. That's a great step to say, I am scared. I don't know how to approach this. Just suddenly it's a heart-based statement, and it opens us up to being able to have a conversation, as opposed to a lot of the posturing that you're seeing. And I mean, I coach quite senior leaders, and you can see different businesses struggling, working out who says what, Black Lives Matter. And it's sort of, you know, if we just bring it back, and that idea of remembering and ancestry, just bring it back, as you said, to an empathetic approach, which is, it's okay for people to feel scared in the same way that a Black person might feel frightened because they don't quite know how to respond. And so I just feel like
it's also about vulnerability. It's also about vulnerability, and recognizing that vulnerability is not a bad thing.
No.
It's actually to recognize and acknowledge your vulnerability, and to step into that and share that is a powerful thing. Because from that point, you know, from that standpoint, people are able to empathize with you more. You know, vulnerability, I feel the vulnerability and empathy, you know, are interconnected. So I've had people asking questions, or saying, oh, I'm going, you know, I do, you know, with various friends about different things. I asked a trans friend a question the other day because of, you know, there's some stuff going around, and I wanted to ask, and I said, look, I may be clumsy, but I really want to understand what this means. And so, you know, and she took time and explained it, and she went, actually, you're not clumsy. I actually appreciate the fact that you're asking, because it means that you want to learn.
Absolutely. And there's so much talk of what does it mean to be a good ally, allyship to Black Lives Matter. You know, we need to have the space for people to then stumble through their questions, and for us that feels, as opposed to, I think that feels like a meaningful movement. And you know, heart-centered, heart-based change is certainly a big aspect, I think, of really shifting the narrative so that people feel they've got the space to explore.
Allyship is not just going on a march.
No,
not just going on a march, or getting a t-shirt, or donating to a charity. Allyship is the stuff that happens behind closed doors.
Yes.
It's the stuff that really happens behind closed doors. If you feel uncomfortable about something, just imagine how we or somebody else who's been othered feels. And that's a daily facet of their lives. If you feel slightly uncomfortable with that, you know, we have been experiencing that a lot. I mean, I posted something the other day and said, I'm tired. I'm tired because, you know, whilst I appreciate that people are now starting to recognize, I've been at this since 1971. And you know, I knew I was Black before I knew myself. I was made aware of the fact that I'm Black before I knew myself. So since 1971, I've been doing this. I'm tired. So excuse me sometimes if I don't have the time or the energy or the inclination to try and hold space for you while you now discover this. I'm appreciative of it. You know, I do recognize that you know, that you're going through your own journey. And I need to also protect myself, because with other people recognizing things in themselves and changes, and I'm not just talking about Black Lives Matter, I'm talking about sustainability and the planet and all of these big isms that, you know, all the big isms that shift means that there is going to be this sense of loss and grieving and trauma and, you know, reliving some of our past experiences in relation to any of those isms. And that in itself is quite a it's not quite, it is a traumatic experience. But this is why
it's rewounding, isn't it, really?
Yeah, but this is why we need medicine. We need to work out what our medicine is to help get through that.
Yeah. I mean, it struck me the other day, I was listening to a podcast, and I also, you know, I was saying to my husband, it's, you know, there are aspects to Black history that I don't know, many actually, that I'm not aware of. And I was listening to a podcast that was talking about the abolition of slavery in Britain. And it was talking about how Britain had abolished the slave trade a couple of 100 years ago. But actually, the reason it abolished the slave trade is because slave owners were compensated to the tune of £20 million. And that compensation was given to the slave owners, not the slaves, already, you know. Okay, so that's the first issue. But that debt, because the British government could afford to pay the debt, they issued bonds. So that debt only got paid in as late as 2015. And I remember when I heard it, and I was like, wow, like, firstly, wow, how can that be so?
Yeah.
But secondly, also my own lack of knowing, you know, and so I offer that because I want to be able to have open conversations with people. I much rather that we can have meaningful conversations across cultures, right? Because that's the only way that then the other voice that you speak to so beautifully, often that story starts to get told, you know. And I'm a systemic practitioner, so in systemic coaching, you look at the voices of the ancestors, and I think about slaves, and I think about the Americas, and I think about all of those unspoken ghosts, dishonored, that have yet to be integrated into the system, you know, as it were, because they don't know their rightful place. I was so moved by that. Just, you know, a revelation to myself about my own understanding, you know.
But this is the point. This is why I'm doing the decolonizing anthropology course, and it's an evening course at Goldsmiths. I see that somebody asked. Brilliant 10-week course. But it's that, you know, recognizing that one of the I remember we had to watch this video, and it's something that I knew and I was aware of and I had thought of, but I'd forgotten. You know, we talk about the Industrial Revolution, and Britain was great in, you know, the Industrial Revolution and the cotton mills. And at school, I learned about the spinning jenny. Where did the cotton come from? The slave trade. You know, so this country's Industrial Revolution could not have been built. You know, the spinning jennies that we all learn about in school, you know, in schools in this country, we were never taught about the fact that in order to have those things and to create the spinning jenny, you needed to have cotton, which came from the slave trade.
Yeah.
And so, you know, then our tax bills up until 2015, a portion of our tax had gone to pay reparations to the slave owners. So, you know, understanding our history, and this is why, you know, cyborg shamanism and ancient wisdom, you know, and indigenous knowledge and natural systems and all of those things is about connecting those dots.
Yeah, remembering who you really are, remembering who we are. In fact, in our first session, which was with Matt McCartney, who's an incredible international speaker and writer, and he said, and I never forget the sentence, it really touched me. He said, we were once an earth honoring people. And just really, you know, it just really it moved me so much, because I thought, wow, there's so much that we don't know in terms of the relevance to who and how they honoured. There are big, huge chunks that we have to start understanding and speaking to.
I know.
And I could talk to you for literally the next 3 hours.
We'll have to do this again.
We would so love you.
Yeah, I'd love to.
We really just love your work. I think, let me just check. I think you saw the questions. I would love to learn more about decolonization.
Yeah, that's the Goldfish course.
How can I find out more? Okay, Zach, when you talk about ancient wisdom, yes, we answered. Yeah. Okay, I think we got through the questions and we're only 11 minutes over.
I know. We could go.
Okay. Loads more to unpack.
I know you and I could talk for hours.
So I just wanted to ask you, we're so delighted to have you, Adam. We'd love to have you back. How can people reach you? How can they support you and your work and get involved? I've already mentioned Black Lives Matter is the charity that any donations that people will be going to. So maybe if you just talk a little bit about.
So you can find me. My website is adahparris.com. And the ISM network that I have created, I'm slowly building it up, but it's ism.earth. And then I'm on social media. I think everywhere is at Adah Parris or at ism earth. And please do get in touch. It's been a real pleasure speaking with you, Remy. I love our conversations. We don't, we speak often, but when we do, and I love the fact that just like, cyborg shamanism and the many patterns that we spoke about, this conversation has been weaving and twisting and turning, and that's what life is like.
Yeah, it's absolutely a rich tapestry.
Yeah, of course.
Let's keep weaving, and we'd love to support you. And if we go live in the summer, we're still sort of in the final deciding phase, and we'd love to have you with us.
I would love to
support.
Yeah.
Earth. And for anyone that wants to reach me, Zach can put my website up as well. It's iamremy.co.uk. And on behalf of Medicine and all the council members, I'd just like to say a huge, huge thank you to you, Adah.
Thank you for having me. And thank you to everybody who's been listening.
Yeah, thank you.
Please do reach out.
Yeah, we will.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Bye.
Bye.